No, it's not a performance pay in disguise. It's certainly paying the best in the industry more.
But what we announced yesterday is what the profession has been asking for.
Hasn't worked overseas. I would doubt that it's going to work in New Zealand.
Poverty, we're talking about health, we're talking about housing, all those out-of-school factors that really impact on children and their families, their ability to be well and ready to learn.
Kia ora anō, I'm Amavi and welcome to this video update for NZEI Te Reo members around the IES or new roles.
I'm Terry. This is the third video in the series. If you haven't watched the first two, we strongly advise you to take a look at them. They provide valuable background information and they're available at the link displayed at the bottom of the screen.
If you've already watched them, you'll have learned that the IES, the government's Investing in Educational Success initiative, is now regarded by advocates and opponents alike as the biggest system shift in the school sector in 25 years, a change that will alter the way our schools operate, how they'll be governed, how we teach our children and relate to our communities.
The last video asked you to begin talking to each other, to your boards and communities about the issues raised by this policy initiative. This was in preparation for the time when the Ministry of Education presented a claim to vary our collective agreement.
That time has now come. Over the next few minutes, we're going to outline the government's claim and the choices we'll have to make. We have to decide whether we reject the IES outright or try to shape an acceptable outcome through bargaining. Neither option will be easy. If we do enter into bargaining and can't achieve a settlement acceptable to members, it could still ultimately mean rejecting the IES.
You'll be asked to make the critical vote in week 4 of this term. Later in this video, we'll outline how that will operate.
Education of New Zealand children is getting a massive boost. It's not just a makeover, but a complete restructuring that'll change the way every school in the country is run.
Since the PM's announcement in January, we've been playing a waiting game as a government-appointed working group has sought to add flesh to the bones of this hastily constructed plan that is the IES.
At your direction, NZEI participated in that working group, guided by the principles you agreed should be the basis of any engagement. We asked for feedback from our representatives on what transpired.
The Minister has talked long and hard about the design of IES being a collaborative process, but it's never been that. The PM hardwired the fundamentals of the IES reforms when he announced them without any prior consultation, and the sector was invited to have input into the minor details. So the working group has been quite constrained. It met 6 times and had to react to a raft of papers placed before them at short notice.
The members of the working group discussed each paper and made suggestions and recommendations. But importantly, all feedback to government was done by majority vote and our voice was only one of 11. We have tabled our own independent papers, standing out from the general position. We stayed in the process in an attempt to reshape the proposal, but really the changes have been fairly cosmetic.
The Cabinet signed off on the working group report and the Ministry has now presented its claims. These ask us to accept changes to our collective agreements to incorporate new roles that are substantially similar to those announced by the Prime Minister in January. Let's take a look at them.
The first of these roles is the Community of Schools Leader, previously called Executive Principal. Government is proposing 250 of these appointments with a responsibility to provide leadership in building collaboration within communities of schools or clusters.
The second role would see the creation of 1,000 Community of Schools teachers, originally termed expert teachers. This role involves working across the clusters, overseeing teachers' achievement of the Community of Schools shared achievement objectives. It is proposed that both this and the leader role be for 2-year fixed terms, renewable for a further 2 years. In addition, there's a claim for a third role, 5,000 Community of Schools in-school teachers appointed to promote best teaching practice within a school. These roles, previously described as lead teachers, will again focus on the achievement of cluster-wide shared achievement objectives. Let's hear how our representatives see the roles.
When we come down to it, very little has changed from what was initially proposed for the roles back in January. There's flexibility around the name of each position, but that's just cosmetic. Whether there will be any further flexibility is unclear.
The roles may help share effective practice and encourage collaboration between schools. But on the other hand, they put millions of dollars into very few hands rather than focus on critical areas our members have highlighted, things that would actually make a difference to the day-to-day education of children.
The executive principal and expert teacher roles are fixed term. They will take teachers and principals out of their classrooms for the equivalent of 2 days a week. This might support some people's career development, but it's not a permanent career pathway.
The lead teacher role is an in-school one. It appears to be similar in concept to our asset teacher role. But for both this role and the other two, there's a lack of clarity about who answers to whom. How will they be appointed? Will they be appraised against the externally set objectives? Or will your school still have control over these processes?
You'll recall there was a change principal role when the policy was announced in January. The Cabinet has now agreed that rather than creating positions, schools with a principal vacancy will be able to apply for an extra allowance for the position. The criteria for school approval is not yet clear.
We're still unclear about the potential for the change principal role to achieve its objective of helping struggling schools. The payment of allowances for only 3 years, as the Ministry is proposing, does not recognise the time required for real and lasting change. International research is pretty mixed about whether this concept actually improves schools.
Integral to the new roles is the creation of communities of schools. It is proposed that these schools would self-select, they would be cross-sector, and they would largely be geographically defined. It won't be compulsory for a school to join a community of schools, but staff wouldn't be eligible for any of the new roles if their school was not in a community, nor would the school have access to any of the resourcing, including inquiry time allowances.
This inquiry time is a big deal in the report of the working group. It is, and I quote, to enable teachers to access, observe, collaborate and reflect with lead teachers and expert teachers within or across our schools. But as our representatives point out, schools and communities already do this.
This contributes to improved student outcomes across the whole curriculum. They're not limited to literacy and mathematics.
Professional development is about more than student achievement. It is about raising teachers' capacity to deliver appropriate programs for their students. We are concerned that schools not involved in the clusters will be denied access to the inquiry time.
So, what about national standards, the elephant in the room? Some time ago, the Minister signalled these and NCEA results would be the basis for measuring student achievement and gauging the success of those charged with the new roles.
Plenty of members have expressed concern that the shared achievement objectives of communities of schools will be based upon NCEA and national standard results, effectively welding this narrow view of learning into our school culture.
We battled hard against this in the working group, and the final report links student achievements to the New Zealand curriculum. So achievement is seen as much wider, but doesn't specifically exclude national standards.
So if we do accept communities of schools and the new roles with their focus on student achievement, we need to ensure that national standards are not part of that. These would narrow the curriculum, reduce children's life opportunities and foster a range of unhelpful and unethical practices, such as teaching to the test and league tables.
So there we are. 5 months on from the Prime Minister's announcement, the Ministry's cards are finally on the table. Ours are also, essentially unchanged from the ones we laid out in April.
The time has arrived for decision making. A national executive has decided that the way to achieve broad participation is to have in-school ballots. National executive is making no recommendation as to which way to vote. That entire decision is for you and your colleagues.
There are 4 votes to make. The first vote will ask you to reassert the quality public education values that you've consistently directed your executive to uphold. The second vote is to state what you feel about the IES. Do you have confidence in the policy as it stands or not? The third vote will be about strategy, choosing which pathway you wish to take. Opting for pathway A is a vote to reject the IES and call on the government to enter into sector-wide consultation on ways to use the $359 million resource to support quality public education. Those are goals that are directly linked to education funding and cannot be achieved at the collective agreement bargaining table. They require intensive community-wide pressure to convince the government of the day to radically rethink their education priorities.
Therefore, if you vote for Pathway A, you will also be committing to a campaign of lobbying and education to build support from boards of trustees and your wider community. You are also signalling that your school will refuse to participate in the IES initiative.
Opting for Pathway B means you vote that NZDI Te Reo Roa negotiates to vary the collective agreements that cover our members. Your negotiating teams are developing a counterclaim based on the principles you've already endorsed. It will focus on significant changes to the new roles the Ministry is proposing. Whether you vote for Pathway A or B, you will have a fourth vote to either endorse or reject that counterclaim. If the majority vote nationwide is in support of Pathway B, those claims will then be the basis for bargaining. If, however, the national preference is for Pathway A, the fourth vote outcome will have no direct relevance.
As there are claims to vary both for primary teachers and the primary principals' collective agreements, teachers and principals will need to cast their votes in separate ballots.
For members in area schools, there will be a slightly different approach. You'll be asked to indicate whether you support Pathway A or Pathway B. However, Pathway B will not include counterclaims at this stage, as your agreement is jointly negotiated by NZDI and PPTA. As this video is being shot, PPTA is negotiating with the Ministry over the introduction of IES roles into the Secondary Teachers Collective Agreement.
There is a huge amount to think about here, and little time before you will have to vote between the 11th and 14th of August. The discussion within your school needs to ramp up now, so that you are prepared for that vote.
There will be briefings for worksite reps and principals between the 28th of July and the 8th of August, and plenty of information to help your discussion on the NZDI website and Stand Up for Kids Facebook group. This is a critical point in our nation's schooling, and together we can help shape the future. Get informed, get talking, and be prepared to act for our children and our profession.
Goodbye and good luck.